Darkness is not an affirmative force. It simply reoccupies the space vacated by the light.
This is the Hamilton Corner on American Family Radio.
It should be uncomfortable for a believer to live as a hypocrite.
Delivering people out of the bondage of mainstream media and the philosophies of this world.
God has called you and me to be his ambassadors, even in this dark moment. Let's not miss our moment.
And now, the Hamilton Corner.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Hamilton Corner here on American Family Radio. I am your host, Abraham Hamilton III. I am excited to be with you today. You certainly don't want to go anywhere with today's program because we have a very special program for you today. We're going to take a look as to what's happening on the ground in Michigan. Have a friend who's become a friend. I've been able to appear on his program. This will be the first time he's been on my program, who happens to live in Michigan. He has some interesting insights that I want to share with you all because Michigan will play a significant role, as it has in recent years. But things tend to be changing in Michigan, and I want to bring that to your attention. But before we get there, thank you to each and every one of you for tuning into the program. As you've heard me say numerous times before, there would be no program if you all didn't tune in. So I greatly appreciate you doing so. And in light of you committing yourself to this program, I do endeavor to make sure it is something as best as I can that is beneficial to you. I hope that you are edified and encouraged and informed and convicted when necessary, and provoked in a proper manner when necessary, provoked in a godly way when necessary. But that is what we seek to accomplish through this program. At this very moment, many of you, if not most of you, are making your transition from your part-time jobs where you generate an income to your full-time jobs where you cultivate an outcome. And I want to remind you what I do, as I do on a daily basis, that what goes on in your house is more important, far more important than what goes on in the White House. As you know, I don't make that statement to detract from the significance of what occurs in the White House. But I make this statement because it's very easy to be so consumed in what's happening in society, especially during an election season, that you be kind of seduced into a tacit neglect of what God really requires of you and me on a daily basis. In our homes, we have the opportunity to shape destinies. In our home, we get to contribute to what the nation will be going forward. And most importantly, our homes are the first external output or outpost that we have to discharge our faithfulness to our God and King. As you've heard me say before, worship is not an activity. Worship is a lifestyle. The pinnacle of the lifestyle of worship is obedience. Unfortunately, in many instances, people sacrifice or neglect the home in an effort to be effective and to be impactful and to win the world. But I want to encourage you to reverse that, to have a proper estimation as to what happens in our home. Our Lord had recorded in Scripture that the first human institution that was established before there was ever modern iterations of civil government, before there was a modern iterations of a priest, even before there was a New Testament church, the first human institution that God established was the family. The first command that God gave to mankind was given within the familial context. Simply put, family is important, primarily important to God, and therefore it should be important to us. Now, I know we have people that are in all walks of life at different places and different stages. In order for us to be effective in our families, what they should be presented with is the overflow of what we enjoy with the Lord directly. So as you're making your transition to your full-time jobs, part-time jobs is where we generate income. Our full-time jobs is where we cultivate an outcome. As you commit yourself, devote yourself to outcome cultivation, I want to encourage you to do so with intentionality, that you welcome the primacy that God places on family to inform how you engage in your family. And by God's grace, and we're going to get into this in a moment, we have no guarantee of the outcome. What is required of us is that we are obedient and faithful. And this is what we want to live in light of. The reality of eternity should guide and drive what we do with the time that God gives us on this side of eternity. With that in mind, let us go to the Word of God. 1 Corinthians chapter 4. Just want to encourage you with this. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. And this is what God's Word says. This is how one should regard us, as servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. Moreover, it is required of stewards that they be found faithful. Some translations render that term faithful as trustworthy. Duty is ours. Results are the Lord's. As you've heard me say, we're not contending for victory. We're contending from victory. But the Lord uses a metaphor to describe his body as a body intentionally. There's one body, many members. The Lord doesn't want every member of his body doing the exact same thing. He doesn't call us to be identical to one another, clones of one another. The metaphor in 1 Corinthians 12 is beautiful. If all were eyes, where would the sense of hearing be? If all were noses, where would the sense of sight be? If all were thumbs, where would the big toes be? Y'all get the analogy. You get the point that I'm making. It's not that we all need to be doing the exact same thing, but we all need to be, another metaphor, rowing in the same direction and rendering our offering. You know, there's some people, that God has gifted to be kind of, that he's given communication gifts to, and that they use those gifts, and they're kind of upfront gifts. But the Lord is intentional in 1 Corinthians 12 in describing that it is those less visible gifts that are indispensable. Think about your own body. As much as your beautiful hair is and your oh, look at those lovely eyes. I can get lost in those eyes. It's wonderful. Your radiant skin, as beautiful as that is, what would you be if your heart stopped working? What would you be if your kidneys just decided, you know what? I'm going to punch out. Where would we be without our lungs? These are organs, clearly, that are more discreet. They're not externally visible, but they are indispensable to the function of the body. The same is true in the Lord's body. Sometimes, and this is because of the combination of corporate culture and even celebrity ideology permeating into the minds of people that are professing Christ followers, to where we tend to think that visibility is synonymous with qualitative assessment. No, it's just that we have different roles to play. But make no mistake about it, every single one of us has a role to play. I've been explaining before as well that God could have made you and planted you at any other point in time in history, and at any other point in the world. You could be as precious as you are. You could live right now, in Sudan. You could live in Germany. But God, by his divine providence, has placed you in the nation where you are. I know we have a contingent of listeners who are in Canada. Thank you for tuning in. I know we have some that are, I guess I should whisper this part, that are pirating the show in China. We have listeners all over the world, but the dominant reality for the majority of our audience is that you're Americans just like me. And in God's divine providence, he knew that you would be alive in the 21st century. He knew that you would be alive, that you would be in America at this time where we have this crazy election season going on, where it is, it's remarkable to me how you have a person who was unanimously regarded as one of the worst vice presidents in American history. I remember reading the headlines and seeing all of the interviews and the television shows that said the Biden ticket has a Harris problem. And then all of a sudden, ServPro, whoosh, like it never even happened. Now, Kamala Harris might just walk on water. It's amazing to me that this is happening all at the same time. But more than it is amazing to me, God knew it would happen. So the question then becomes, what is God requiring of you? What is he requiring of me? I've been talking about November 5th, no doubt about it, but November 6th, where are you going to be? Where are you going to be? What are you going to be engaged in? What is the Lord requiring of you? What is foremost required of a servant is that he be found faithful. Our founder, Brother Down, is known for saying that. God doesn't call us to be successful. He clearly is communicating success as it's culturally expected and defined. God calls us to be faithful. That concept is one of the things that as the Lord wakes me up in the morning and I hop out of my bed, that is on the forefront of my mind. How can I be faithful today? We all have the same 24 hours in a day. We all need rest. We all need fuel. What are we going to do with the time that God gives us? I've explained before, and I like to reflect on this myself. Do we even realize that time is something that God has created? And he's blessed us with innovations and instruments that aid us in measuring the passage of time. When I consider the measuring of the passage of time, I also consider and assess, how am I using the time that is passing as I measure it? What have I done today with my time? Who am I? Am I a vessel that is filled sufficiently so that I may be one that overflows into the lives of those who are around me? I think about you all. I think about this program. I've met some of you. I have not met all of you. But I can tell you that you are important to me mostly because you're important to God. How can I be a blessing? How can I be a benefit? Sometimes you guys ask me, hey, you watch that stuff, you know, it's not because it's fun. I don't want to have to sit around and wade through word salads. You know, it's in the cloud. It's above us. Bobby asked me, hey, what time are you going to be in the studio today? Well, I grew up in a middle-class family. But I do it because I want to be faithful with the time that God has given me as well. What is God requiring of you? What has he deposited in you that he would like to see come to fruition through you? How can you be maximally effective in this time that God has given us? One of those things, and I certainly would encourage you, I would never try to intrude on anybody's consciences, but one of the low-hanging fruit is civic engagement. Vote. Listen, we have an opportunity in our nation to do what is a rarity in world history. Anybody who considers the reality of humanity over the spans of time, you realize, wait a minute, this concept of self-governance, constitution of Republican government with democratic features, man, that's not common in the world throughout world history. But because that's where we live, and I see this with people who try to condemn and complain about America, usually, and I don't mean this as an insult or a condemnation, but usually people that complain about America so vigorously have never really been anywhere else. Usually. Not everybody. I don't want to be overbroad in my assessment, but usually they haven't been anywhere else. But if you talk to people who have been in other places and you see people literally risking their lives, literally, to get to this nation, it should cause us to stop and consider. Man, what? I'll never forget one of my first days in law school. You know, I had a classmate who was Cuban in ethnic ancestry. Her parents came over first. They had her here. And at our law school graduation, man, the parents gave me the biggest hug ever. And the first thing, I never met this young lady's father, the first thing he said to me was, I thank God for America because God has saved my family through America. When you got other people on the other side just want to trash the nation. What is foremost required of a servant is that he or she is found faithful. How can you be faithful today? Do you have a vision for how you may be faithful tomorrow? If you consider the reality of our lifespans, they're really the accumulation of choices and decisions that we make moment by moment, day by day. Resolve it in your heart that you will be considered among the ranks, counted among the ranks of the faithful.
shining light into the darkness. This is the Hamilton Corner on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to the Hamilton Corner. Abraham Hamilton III here. I am delighted to have on the program with me a man who is an award-winning journalist. He's a television broadcaster and radio host with over 30 years of experience. He founded and built one of America's premier TV production companies and now hosts the #1 syndicated radio program in Michigan. It is the Steve Gruber Show, which can be heard Monday through Friday from 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Steve Gruber is also the host of America's Voice Live with Steve Gruber on the Real America's Voice television network, which can be heard weekdays and viewed, weekdays from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern on the website, americasvoice.news, or on Pluto or on Dish. I know many of you get the Real America's Voice network because you tell me. Please join me in welcoming to the program for the first time, none other than Steve Gruber. Steve, thank you for joining me here on the Hamilton Corner.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me on the corner.
Oh, man, it is absolutely my privilege, and I thank you because you've had me on your show, your radio show once, and multiple times on your television show. And so I said,
that's because you're so good looking.
Oh, well, my wife does agree. My wife
there you go.
does agree.
Yeah.
But I wanted to have a conversation with you because I found you to be such an encouraging wealth of information, a wealth of understanding and analysis. But also you happen to live in Michigan, which is going to play a critical role in this election cycle. So let's just start right there. Historically, Michigan was viewed to be a part of kind of the blue wall. But recently, and for the first time in this election cycle, polls are beginning to indicate that President Trump may win Michigan at the top of the ticket. What are you seeing on the ground there in Michigan?
Well, there had been 7 polls in a row, and it was all pretty obvious that it still is. There's an outlier poll that came out today from Quinnipiac that shows Kamala Harris leading by 4 points in Michigan. Don't believe it. It's an outlier. I don't know how they got that, because there were, like I said, 7 polls in a row that showed the race either tied or Donald Trump leading by as much as 3 points. And the polling companies, by the way, I own a company called Michigan News Source as well, which is a straight news platform. Great team over there, does wonderful journalism. We did a poll with Mitchell Research. We've done 3 now. We have another one coming here in another week and a half, just before, maybe a week, I guess, before the election day. My poll showed Trump +1, and Mitchell Research is the most accurate pollster in Michigan, according to Nate Silver, for whatever that's worth. Atlas Intel, that was the #1 poll back in 2020. An organization out of Brazil has Trump +3. Trafalgar, that's historically done very well in predicting these swing states, has Trump +2. So the way I feel about it here on the ground, and there's a variety of reasons for it. You can start with the EV mandates that are doing great damage to the auto industry. So union folks and UAW folks and people connected to the auto industry are leaving the Democrats. Listen, these have always been Democrat constituents. They've always been a voting bloc, have the unions, but you saw what happened with the Teamsters here just recently, Abraham, and that is the Teamsters voted 60% and said, yeah, we're not going with Kamala Harris. We're supporting Donald Trump. And the Teamsters, instead of doing the right thing and saying, well, 60% of our members support Donald Trump, we're going to endorse him, they just didn't endorse. But here in Michigan, we're seeing a great swing, and this is true around the country. Working people, blue-collar people, people that are looking at their monthly investments or their monthly bills and going, man, we're just not doing very well. I mean, my electric bill here at my house has doubled in the last 3 years. Doubled. Not just gone up some, it's doubled. And that's not unique to me. I hear that story from all sorts of people. So in Michigan, my feeling is the economy is the #1 driver of what's going to happen. The Democrats have tried desperately to infuse abortion into the conversation because what else do they have? But in Michigan, we voted on abortion a number of years ago. That's come and gone. That's over. It's been codified. I don't agree with the way it happened, but that's off the table now for most people. But another section of the voting population here in Michigan that is significant is the Muslim population in Southeast Michigan, places like Dearborn and Hamtramck in Southeast Michigan and the suburbs around Detroit, a significant number of folks who, by the way, don't support Kamala Harris because of what's going on in Gaza. And they are threatening and predicting, in fact, some that 200,000 votes could go to Jill Stein, who's on the ballot here in Michigan. So a lot of games were played here. Let me just dig into that for just a second. Jill
Please.
Stein, the Democrats sued to keep Jill Stein off the ballot in Michigan. They failed. They sued to keep Cornel West off the ballot. They failed. They sued to keep Robert F. Kennedy Jr. off the ballot. They failed. And then they sued to keep him on the ballot after he dropped out, and they succeeded. So, these are the people, by the way, that tell you they want every vote to count. It's democracy and defending. They want every vote to count. If that's true, why would they sue to keep Robert F. Kennedy on the ballot when he has dropped out of the pursuit of the White House? I mean, it speaks for itself. But right now, I believe Donald Trump's winning Michigan by about a point, maybe a point and a half. Now, I don't know what the variables are going to be. We know that he outperformed the polls in 2016. He outperformed the polls again in 2020. I mean, Joe Biden only won the presidency by 44,000 votes spread across 3 states, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Georgia. That's it. There's the White House. There's the whole shooting match. Those 3 states determine the outcome of the election at 44,000 votes. And it's going to be close. But I think in Michigan, you're looking at about 80,000 vote margin for Donald Trump. It'll be close because, they demonize Donald Trump every step of the way here in Michigan and everywhere else. You saw it again with Kamala Harris basically saying, well, Donald Trump is Hitler and he wants generals that are like Hitler and all this. It's just like, we see this too often. But right now in Michigan, if I was going to put my finger in the air, I will say, and I talked to Donald Trump a number of times this year, and every time he talked to me, because, if we win Michigan, we win. He believes that. I believe that. And I believe right now it's advantage Trump in Michigan.
That leads me to my next question, because I was literally about to ask you, what do you see the significance of the outcome in Michigan for the Electoral College in terms of who ultimately wins the presidency? You alluded to it already. Why do you believe Michigan, as Michigan goes, so goes the presidential race?
Well, because I think if Michigan ends up in the red column, so does Pennsylvania. Wisconsin probably as well, but if Michigan goes, Pennsylvania goes. And so that's a significant block right there. I mean, if you look at the map, if you consider the 7 swing states, I think you can probably at this point take Arizona and Georgia off the map. I think that the lead by Donald Trump in Arizona and Georgia is significant enough that they're probably not really up for grabs anymore. I think they're outside the margin of error. I do. Not everybody will agree with that. North Carolina is more problematic. North Carolina's voted for Donald Trump twice. But that whole hurricane thing.
Yeah.
I had boots on the ground and people in North Carolina here just a couple of days ago. They spoke to a woman as an example whose polling place had been destroyed by the floods. Her polling place had been 2 miles from her house. They said, no problem. We have a new polling place for you. You can go vote there. It's 50 miles away. That's her new polling place. These are not people of means. These are people that are, struggling as much as anybody, maybe more so. The western part of North Carolina, the mountains, these are not wealthy people by and large. These are working class, lower middle class people, and driving 50 miles, 100 miles round trip and putting gas in the car to do that. It's an ask. It's a pretty big lift for some folks. So I'm carpool people, please. So North Carolina, less likely. But Michigan would offset North Carolina because here's the math of it. If Donald Trump wins Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, that's the ball game, and holds on to the other states he had in 2016. That's the ball game. It's over. He wins. So if you lose North Carolina, his path then needs Michigan to get there. All right. Or Arizona or whatever. Michigan's easier. Arizona's only 11. Michigan's 15. And so North Carolina's 15 as well, I think. So that's how you get there. And that's why, to me, it's so important. 16. There you go. Yeah, we lost one. They didn't. You're right.
That's right. Yeah.
So there you go. That's why it's so important and critically important. And in North Carolina, I mean, it was all red until a couple of recent polls where Atlas Intel, again, one of the most accurate polls, had Harris +2 here on the 17th of October. We'll see what happens because, as you know, Donald Trump has always outperformed the polls. And you're seeing that. Here are some big indicators for me. You look at Pennsylvania, and you look at the Senate race there. And you see the Democrat, incumbent is now saying, I supported Donald Trump on this. And Alyssa Slotkin in Michigan, the Democrat, for an open seat there, doing the same thing. I voted for Trump on this. And the same thing with Tammy Baldwin in
Wisconsin. Yeah.
Wisconsin, doing the same thing. These senators, Bob Casey in Pennsylvania, Alyssa Slotkin in Michigan, Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin. Oh, look, Donald Trump, he's a threat to democracy. He's Hitler. But, hey, I voted with him. I mean, really? I mean, that's your line. There's Chuck Schumer sitting at the Al Smith dinner, chuckling along to Donald Trump. He's a threat to democracy. He'll destroy America. Oh, but I can go to dinner with him and have jokes? Come on, people. I mean, that is such dishonest reporting. I've met Donald Trump a number of times. He is not at all what they've described. In fact, he was never a racist until he decided to run for president. And then I guess that NAACP award that he won and the time that he spent with Al Sharpton and all these other folks. And come on. Look, they made fun of Mitt Romney for having a black grandchild that had been adopted into his family. I mean, this is how grotesque some of these people on the left will be.
Yeah.
But I think it's catching up with them. Go ahead.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And it is very, very telling. What you just stated is worth, running a highlighter over, where you have Senator Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin. You have senators in Pennsylvania. You have that are Democrat senators that are now publicly affirming the things that they voted along with President Trump with.
That's right.
Why would
Tammy
they do
Baldwin
that,
and
Steve?
Bob Casey.
Why would they do that?
Well, and here's the thing about Wisconsin. This is why I think it's dangerous for the Democrats. Here's the thing. Right now, the average in Montana is Tim Sheehy, the challenger to John Tester, longtime incumbent Democrat John Tester, who I went to college in Montana. Let me tell you, this guy, he might be from Montana. He lost a couple of fingers to a corn picker somewhere along the way. Yes, he's a farmer, this and that, but he does not fit Montana. I mean, him voting with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and open borders and so forth. Look, they're not buying that. So Montana's going red. West Virginia's already gone. Trust me on that. I mean, that's done. That's red. So there's 2. That gives the Republicans 51. There's some thought that they could lose Nebraska. That's not going to happen. Deb Fischer will hold on to Nebraska. Mark my words on that. There's a good challenger there, Osborne, who's an independent, but he's not going to pull it off. They're dumping tons of money in there. So then you've got 4 close races, because I didn't mention Ohio. Mm-hmm. Marino's doing really well in Ohio against Sherrod Brown. So you've got that happening as well. So you've got 4 states that are all like neck and neck now for Senate seats. I'm going to guess the Republicans pull 2 of those. Which 2? I don't know. If you go back and look at what's happened in Wisconsin historically, right? They told us Senator Ron Johnson in 2016 was getting creamed. He was dead. He was 6 points under. He was all done, right?
That's what they
and
said.
He won.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he won. And that's why I think that Tammy Baldwin's in real trouble. Wisconsin is a notoriously tough state to poll. I don't know why, but everybody says the same thing. All these pollsters that I know, and I know Robert Cahaley at Trafalgar. I know some of these people. I know Mark Mitchell at Rasmussen, and they say Wisconsin is just really hard to poll. I can't tell you why. It's just really hard for them to get accurate numbers. And so when they say Tammy Baldwin's winning by a point, nobody there is going to be surprised if Eric Hovde comes out and wins by 2. They're just not going to be surprised. I'll tell you right now. So you've got those 4 states, all the Great Lakes states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, 4 of the 8 Great Lakes states right there that could certainly put Republicans in a commanding lead. But it really doesn't matter. If you have 51 or 53 or 54, not a heck of a lot of difference until you get to 60.
Yeah.
But
anything under 60 is the same. Pretty much.
For the most part, right. But it would be nice to have 53, 54, 55 on a really good night.
Yeah.
And take that into the next election cycle. That would be a nice place to be going into the next round. So it's all important stuff. Donald Trump is in the position to carry these people over the finish line.
Now,
I think.
Yeah. I think your assessment is right, and it should be good for people to know. We'll have election night coverage right here on American Family Radio. I'll be a part of it that evening. I want to ask this question, and we're getting close to the break, so I expect to have to carry this over into the next segment. But the question is twofold. One, would you describe for our audiences here what you think the significance is of the Senate races, because there are lots of people who focus on the top of the ticket that don't realize there are lots of down ballot races, its implications for the interaction with the executive, but also for the things happening in your own neck of the woods. And then secondarily, the political impact of having President Trump at the top of the ticket and how that could affect down ballot races. Let's start with the first half first. What is the significance of the makeup of Congress and the Senate in particular, and its impact?
Why does it matter?
Yes.
Let me tell you why it matters. This is very simple. At the end of the next term, whoever the president is, at the end of the next term, Clarence Thomas will be 80 and Thomas Alito will be 78. There's your Supreme Court majority. So if the Republicans get 51 votes or more, now, and it's probably better to have more because you have people like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski who are both a little mushy, to say the least.
And don't forget about Mittens. Put him up. Mittens wrong. Put him up.
Yeah, he'll be gone.
Thank you.
Yeah, he'll be gone. But my point being is, and as much as I don't like Mitch McConnell, I have to give credit where credit's due. Mitch McConnell delivered 3 conservative Supreme Court justices. Maybe not as conservative as I'd like. They're not Samuel Alito, but they're better than what we had. And so why is the Senate important? 3 things: the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court. That's why it matters.
Well said. You are listening to the Hamilton Corner. My guest is Steve Gruber, host of the Steve Gruber Show, which can be heard 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday. He also is the host of America's Voice Live, which can be watched weekdays 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern. He's going to hang with us a little more, and we're talking about the election this term, his insights, being on the ground in Michigan, and his awareness with his experience and his context. You need to tune in, tap in, tell a friend, share the show.
The Hamilton Corner podcast and 1-minute commentaries are available at afr.net. Back to the Hamilton Corner on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to the Hamilton Corner. Abraham Hamilton III. We're already in the final segment. This show is speeding by today. My guest is Steve Gruber, host of the Steve Gruber Show, which can be heard Monday through Fridays, 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern. I wholeheartedly commend to you his website, stevegruber.com. There's lots of information available to you there. Those who are in Michigan, if you don't already know how you can catch Steve's show, you can connect to all of the affiliates right there on his website, or you can go, in addition to that, I encourage you to go to americasvoice.news, which is where you can be connected to his television show, Real America's Voice, that airs in the afternoons, 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern. Before we went to the break, I was asking a question to Steve about the Senate. And while we were doing the break, he mentioned he wanted to bring up one point in particular. And Steve, I want to give you the floor to go ahead and to address the points you wanted to address.
I want to point this out because I keep hearing this number, and you might know more about it than I do, but I keep hearing this number that in 2020, 32 million self-identified Christians did not cast a ballot. Guys, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? I mean, honestly, if you want abortion up to the moment of birth or up until 5th grade, I guess like a lot of Democrats would like, I suppose, right? Then don't vote or let them control the narrative, because here's what will happen. When I talk about the Supreme Court, this is why it's so critically important. If the Democrats ended up in the White House this time or next time or whenever they get there, and they have a Senate that's either 50-50 or 51-49 in their favor, they're going to get rid of the filibuster.
Yeah.
And when they get rid of the filibuster, they're going to pack the Supreme Court. It's not a matter of whether they're going to do it. It's a matter of whether they get a chance to do it. And so we need to stop that and keep that at bay for as long as possible and put things in place that prevent that from happening, because most people in America don't want that to happen. So I say to anybody listening or watching here today, you've got to vote. I've already voted in Michigan, and look, it's the first time I've ever done it. And I get that a lot of people do not trust the system, or they think that the machines won't work right, or whatever the case may be. But I can guarantee you this. There's one way to make sure your vote doesn't count. That is to never cast it. Mm-hmm. And I guarantee you, if you don't cast a vote, it will never count. So you have to have some faith in the system, and you have to have some faith in massive numbers. Because as I look around, I see enthusiasm for Donald Trump. Everything's trending in his direction. And I know a lot of people, well, they're turned off by Trump. They don't like what he says. Look, I'm not voting for a pastor. I'm not voting for a teacher to be in the pulpit. I have people that I deal with in that world that teach me the word of God, and we share experiences and so forth. But we have to have somebody that believes in this country, that believes that as a general proposition, abortion is wrong, that having an open border and not vetting people and just letting anybody come in and move into your neighborhood is wrong, that having government stand on the backs of small businesses and regulate them out of existence is wrong, to take and destroy our energy sector so that other countries can dominate us is wrong, and that the idea that you can take a boy and send him into surgery and turn him into a girl is wrong. We need somebody that has the fundamental understanding of the world that we live in, a fundamental common sense. And so I say to anybody, of those 32 million Christians and people of faith that have not voted, I say, what's wrong with you? Make a plan, get out there and vote. I don't care what it takes, and take a couple people with you. There are no excuses to sit on the sidelines this time around. That's the end of my little speech.
Well, I can tell you your speech is well received by this audience. I can tell you that for sure. And you say it for the first time. You did it for the first time. I'm pretty sure you're referring to voting early as opposed to.
I am. So, yeah, and in fact, I filled out. Michigan has the voting began in late September here.
Yep.
You can get an absentee ballot, and I took it down to the drop box. Now, I just live in a township that only has a couple thousand people in my township. It's not big. It's not small. It's just somewhere between Lansing and Ann Arbor in southern Michigan. But I called my township and said, hey, how does it work? What's the drop box like? It's a drop box. It's secure. It's got a camera on it 24 hours a day. And did you see this, by the way? Speaking of which, how far will the Democrats go? In Montana today, a Democratic senatorial campaign committee operative, Laszlo Gendler, was caught on one of those 24-hour cameras trying to remove a ballot drop box from the wall where it was in Glacier County, Montana. And again, I go back to that critical Senate race in Montana. Some of these folks will do anything. Why is it always Democrats that get caught doing this stuff? Why is it always Democrats? The ones that want every vote to count and all that nonsense. Believe in democracy. No, they don't. No, they don't. Anyhow, I digress.
Well, no, you haven't digressed at all. And I was thinking, and I have some sound on it, but I just want to ask you for the sake of time, because I'm pretty sure you saw this story where it's being reported now that the British Labour Party,
oh yeah,
the British Labour Party has paid for staffers that are just happening to make that trek across the ocean to volunteer for the Harris campaign. What do you make of that story? Because I thought foreign interference into our elections was a problem. Was I mistaken?
Well, there's that. And there's that. I just saw Tim Walz standing there telling his son how to vote at a polling place. By the way, that's illegal in Minnesota and pretty much everywhere else.
Yes.
But I also saw the British Labour Party was targeting Elon Musk, trying to figure out how to destroy Twitter.
Yes,
right?
and specifically gaining an audience over the last several years with elected Democrat officials, including Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Of course. These people they're all together in this. And when you hear them saying these outrageous things about, people have done this, they're fascists. They're the masters of projecting. The masters. Anything they're accusing the other side of doing, take a look a little bit closer. You're likely going to find them doing the exact thing they're accusing others of doing by projecting it onto them. Oh, look at this over here. Look at that. He's just terrible what he's doing over here. Look, Donald Trump didn't weaponize the Department of Justice. The people that are there now did that, or maybe when Barack Obama got there, they did that. Donald Trump didn't, suppress news stories. The corporate media in America did that with the help of their friends in Democrat circles. Let's just be honest about what we know. And what we know is when they keep telling you things like that, the truth is they're almost always doing it themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is, it's striking. So what do people in our nation, and as I mentioned to you during the break, that this audience is comprised of people from all over this country, from coast to coast, north to south, you name it, they're in. What do the people listening to us need to know about the British Labour Party? What is it about the Labour Party that would have them to make a choice in the American election, so much so where they're willing to travel to canvass
Well,
for candidates.
here's what you need to know. When you look at the people that gather in Davos every year, when you look at the World Economic Forum, when you look at the World Health Organization, it's funny, you keep seeing the same faces pop up, right? John Kerry shows up, Lurch, as I like to call him. John Kerry shows up, pontificating about, climate change, and he's too important to fly commercial. He needs to fly a private jet. He's really busy and in a hurry, and such other disingenuous things like that. When Greta Thunberg is the person that's the brain trust for these folks, it's pretty dangerous.
How dare you?
How dare you? The bottom line is this. These folks that are globalists are all in this mindset together that somehow they're smarter, more gifted, more apt to give the right answer about how we should live. They want us in 15-minute cities so that we can, own nothing and be happy. They want us to be subservient to them in a place where there is no God, of course. God will be removed from the conversation because that's just deviant behavior to worship God. You see, what they really hate is the indispensable right. And the indispensable right is the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. That is the indispensable and the most coveted of all rights. I mean, think about it. Freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion, freedom to gather peaceably, and a redress of grievances. I believe those are the 5 things you'll find in the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, right?
Yep.
It is the most envied piece of governance written anywhere in the world. It has been for almost 250 years. I mean, it is the indispensable amendment. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution is the envy of the world. And these people want to destroy it. Yes. I mean, when you hear these people out here, Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, Hillary Clinton, free speech doesn't include hate speech and disinformation. Of course it does. That's specifically what it defends. If I say something that you find highly offensive, sorry, that's my right to do that. If you're offended or angry, that's okay. And this goes all the way back for me. I don't know how old you are, but 1977, I was 11 years old in the summer of 1977, and the Nazis marched in Illinois, right? A little town in Illinois that was a Jewish town, right? And the United States Supreme Court issued a ruling saying, yes, the Nazis can march down the street in this Jewish community. And I said to my mother, I said, that's terrible. Why would they allow that to happen? They should never. That's just awful. My mother said, listen. My mother, who taught 5th grade for 30 years, said, listen, the only way you know whether you agree with something or disagree with something or somebody's right or somebody's doing something terribly wrong is to hear them talk. If they don't talk, you never know what they're thinking. You never know what they're up to. You never know what their motives are. So we need more speech. We need to be able to hear these people. She was right. And that's why the Nazis marched in 1977 through the streets of a Jewish community in Illinois. It's why, the Klan can still have gatherings on the public square. But by doing that, you know how awful the Klan is. You know how awful the Nazis were that marched there in Skokie, Illinois. You know how awful they are. Because you were able to hear their disgusting, abhorrent comments, right? And if you didn't know, you wouldn't know how awful they were. So I want more speech. And when these people say, oh, misinformation, who are you to decide for me what's real and what's not real? I mean, are you going to go shut down the National Enquirer? I mean, I read on the National Enquirer that monkeys live on the moon and that Elvis is serving hamburgers in Kalamazoo. Should we shut them down for disinformation or misinformation, for violating, the rights of being accurate? No, and I don't want a government agency telling me what I'm allowed to see, read, or hear. We already have enough control of the things that you see, read, and hear because there's a small group of people that in my entire life have controlled pretty much everything that I see, read, and hear by way of, corporate media and publication companies and those that produce books and CDs and everything else. Look, there's a handful of people that control most of that already anyway. And that's why I think one of the greatest things that's ever happened is Elon Musk spending $44 billion to buy Twitter and set it free. I still call it Twitter, by the way. I'm old school.
And I call it the artist formerly known as Twitter.
Right. The artist formerly known as, but I mean, that is the most wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Free speech.
We used to understand
for anybody to say anything. Go ahead.
We used to understand in this country that the answer, when you have putrid ideas, anathema ideas, the solution was never to crush their ability to espouse them. It was to expose the fallacy and the problems with those ideas with more speech. But what you have happening, and you rightly point out that the seemingly consistent connector to the globalists among us, whether they be domestic Americans or not, is their universal disdain for the First Amendment. You mentioned Lurch, which I call him Lurch too. I thought that was funny. Lurch was in front of the World Economic Forum a couple weeks ago, lamenting that we had a First Amendment, that it was a hindrance to being able, and this was his exact word, to hammer out ideas that he found non-approachable within public discourse. That seems to be a consistent phenomenon. We're coming to the very end of the program. I'm sorry?
Yeah. Thoughts that he didn't like, the thought police. Yep. I mean, welcome to 1984. It came a few years late, but it came.
It absolutely did. I'll do with you what you often do with me on your program. I'll give you the final word as we're heading up to the end of the show, because what you describe seems to be a clash of worldviews. Is it not?
It is a clash of worldviews. Do you want to be free? Do you want to be able to speak your mind? Do you want to be able to worship? I mean, in other countries, Christians have to, go off in secret and worship, much like Jews did in Germany in the 1930s. Or do you want to be able to worship in public as you see fit? These folks would strip these churches of the nonprofit status they have. And in order to do that, you have to save the Supreme Court. In order to save the Supreme Court, you have to vote. Vote for freedom. That's Donald Trump. That's for Republicans to be senators. God bless you. Save America. We can do this together.
Steve Gruber, ladies and gentlemen. Steve, thank you so much for being on the program with me. Folks, share the show with your friends and loved ones. As I started the program, I will conclude it. What is foremost required of a servant? That he be found faithful. We all have the same 24 hours in a day. We all have the same opportunities. What will we do with the time and the opportunities that we have? What is foremost required of a servant is that he or she be found faithful. Faithfulness is the order of the day. You all have a wonderful evening. Lord willing, we'll be back tomorrow. Have a great evening, everybody.